and today we'll be discussing various ways to record, maintain, and utilize deposits and retainers in Design Manager. As usual, we'll be using examples in both Design Manager and Design Manager Professional, and if you'd like to see a function in one platform or the other, just ask at one of the question periods. Also, as usual, some functions will be available only in one platform or the other. So let's go ahead and get started. Money is received from the client prior to the inception of the planning and purchasing of goods, which are known as deposits and retainers in Design Manager, will be stored in the client deposit liability account. And if we look at our chart of accounts, we can see our liabilities are in the 20,000s, and there's our client deposit liability account. To associate a particular account as the particular client deposit account, that's done under the company information settings, other accounts, and you can see under the accounts receivable accounts, here's where we classify a particular account as that specialized client deposit account. In the professional platform, you would get to that under your GL, company information and settings, other accounts, and there's our client deposit account. And like the other accounts on this other account tab, these are very specialized accounts that hold specialized functions within Design Manager. So changing them without knowing what you're doing can be detrimental. So always ask your accounting professional or contact us at support@designmanager.com. Okay, now Design Manager uses accrual accounting, and in accrual accounting, we're allowed to hold these funds, these deposits and retainers from the client, without being liable for sales tax, yet still maintain the necessary working capital to run the business. And we'd even be receiving interest if the monies are sizable. Deposits and retainers will eventually be used against the balance of an invoice to the client. And the client deposit account is a liability because the funds truly are still the client's until they're eventually applied to an invoice that represents the ultimate transfer of ownership of those goods and services. Retainers and deposits are fundamentally similar, but they do have different uses and benefits. In brief, retainers are funds received from the client to allow you to begin purchasing and ordering the agreed upon goods and services and really act as a good faith receipt between your company and the client to ensure payment upon the finished design services and merchandise purchases. They are not associated with any actual items, but rather with the project itself. The allocation and administration of retainers is completely manual. Deposits, unlike retainers, deposits are tied intricately to the items contained upon the proposal to which the deposit is received. Deposits will be automatically applied to the item upon that item being invoiced to the client. Let's discuss retainers in detail a little bit more first. The benefits of retainers are that they give you complete control over how those funds are going to be utilized. With that power and freedom, however, comes greater responsibility in accurately monitoring the usage of a retainer or retainers. To create a retainer in Design Manager, we go to our Documents and Accounting, and let's go down to our Hilson Pocono home as an example. And we're going to make a retainer for $5,000 that they're providing us for some work on the wine cellar. To make a retainer, I could use my cash receipt button, or I could right-click and do New Retainer from Client. Either way, we get to the New Cash Receipt window. And again, the window is very similar in the professional platform, as we shall see shortly. First, we enter the amount. We said $5,000, and we'll imagine that they paid via check as our payment type. Input our check number. Retainers always require us to use our top grid, our client deposit and retainer grid, and we always need to enter the amount of the retainer manually. The first line of that grid, you can see, says use to enter retainer for this project. Once it's highlighted, click the edit button as indicated by the pencil, and we can input the amount of the retainer, which is $5,000. Transaction descriptions in Design Manager are entirely optional, but I highly, highly recommend them. I find them to be invaluable tools when I'm going to research information that may have been entered in months or even years prior. And it could be as simple as container for wine cellar. If we click OK, we now have our This Payment column being updated to reflect the $5,000, and we just tag or select the retainer, and upon doing so, we see our total deposit retainer increase. We don't have any payments on invoices in this case, so our total receipt matches our amount perfectly with a difference of 0. If we click OK, we now have our retainer being displayed. There's our retainer transaction, today's date, the full amount, the client's check number conveniently listed, and there's our transaction description as well. Once we enter a retainer, in Design Manager we show an information node about the retainer and the retainer balance. So we can see our total retainer, how much has been applied on invoices, which of course is 0 in this case, and the total available, $5,000. So that's a very convenient way to get a quick snapshot of how much retainer you've received for a project, how much has been applied to invoices, and what you still have available to use. We can also go to the Hilsons project, edit. In the project window for the Hilsons, we can look at our status tab. And this is going to show us our deposits and retainers here as well. Here's the deposit on proposal 1 back on September. And here is our retainer we just entered today. Retainer amount available is listed in the bottom left. Our available deposit is immediately to the right, and the total amount of retainer and deposit is also displayed. So the project status tab is extremely helpful and a quick way to monitor how we stand with our available deposits and retainers and how much we have left to use. In Professional Platform, same window is under our Projects, Hilson, Status, and we can see our status summary and our deposit and retainer tab there as well. So, entering a retainer, very simple in Design Manager. Now let's think of what will happen after we've received the retainer. Well, we can apply it to invoices. We might want to move it to a deposit on a proposal, all sorts of ways to reallocate or adjust where these funds are going to be used. Let's hop over to the Professional Platform, and let's imagine that the Carters want us to, we're nearing completion on their Pennington home, and we just have the guest bedroom to finalize. So, if we take a peek at our proposal window for our Carter's Pennington home, we can see we have proposal 3 for our guest bedroom. We've requested $4,250, but have yet received no deposit upon that. However, if we look at our status for the same project, we can see we've received a retainer of $500 and indeed have that, $5,000, and that $5,000 is available. You can see that as an open retainer on the deed deposit and retainers grid as well. So we have this additional funds that we received and can reallocate that as desired by the Carters. So what we would do is in Professional, all of our cash receipt manipulation would be under our accounts receivable drop-down, cash receipt window, or we could use our common controls and go out to the stack of 2 sets of money there and click our cash receipt button. Click the Add button, and that brings us to our new cash receipt window, which again looks very similar in both platforms. If we input the Carter's Pennington home code, we can see all of the areas to which funds can be attributed. Now, when we're moving funds around, we're reallocating a retainer, for example, we're always going to have an amount of 0. We're simply reallocating existing funds, not adding new funds into Design Manager. Put 0 there. Today's date is just fine. What I like to do in these cases is I'll select a payment type of check, and I'll put as the check number, apply retainer. Just as another checks and balances or another quick indication to myself of how these funds were reallocated. To move our $5,000 retainer, and we can see it right here, we've received $5,000 to date. We still have $5,000 available, and we're going to put all of that money down on our proposal number 3. To do so, let's highlight our retainer, click our Edit button, and we're going to indicate the reallocation of those funds as a negative $5,000. Again, transaction descriptions entirely optional. Move to deposit on proposal 0003 is just more than adequate. So now we see that this payment has gone up to, reduced to a minus 5,000. And proposal 3 is looking for us to receive the requested amount, but we're actually going to apply $5,000, not the $4,250 Design Manager is anticipating. So we'll highlight, edit once again, and change the amount to $5,000. I like to update the transaction description, moved from retainer, and click OK. So now we have a negative $5,000 retainer, a positive $5,000 deposit. Both are tagged or selected. So if we look at our totals, our net deposit retainer is 0. Of course, we have no payments on invoices, so our total receipt matches our amount of 0, and we have a difference of 0 as well. If we click OK, we can see we have a single cash receipt with 2 distributions. There's our positive deposit and our negative retainer. Our total receipts, of course, is still going to be 0. Again, the net effect on cash is nothing. If we post these through, we can see our entry on our existing cash receipt tab, entry of 0, but does have 2 offsetting pieces, negative retainer, positive deposit. If we look back on our project status window, we can now see we still have $5,000 available, but our retainer received has gone down to 0, while our deposits received has increased to $1,585.18. And we can also see a linear progression of those as our retainer coming in initially. There's our retainer being reapplied with the negative, and it's moved down onto proposal 3. And if we look on our proposal window, we can see proposal 3, we've requested $4,250. We've actually received or reallocated that $5,000. There's my apply retainer. Again, I like to have that as a quick status or a quick note to myself that that's how those monies came onto the proposal, and today's date indicating that today was the day that we moved the retainer. And if we look a little bit deeper on our proposal status window, we can even see that our deposit requested amounts for each of the items is less than the deposit received because of that additional application of the deposit. So, the retainer, very convenient tool to handle funds coming in from the clients, as it gives you all of the power to reallocate to other deposits or proposals, to invoices, etc. Let's take another look at some of the flexibility of the retainer. Let's hop back onto Design Manager. Design Manager has an additional little function that allows us to use the Apply Retainer function. So if we're looking at our Carter's Brigantine Beach Home, we may want to reallocate or reapply this retainer. And in Design Manager, I can use the Apply button, or I could right-click and do the Apply Retainer. The Apply Retainer window, if you notice, looks very much like our cash receipt window. It just has a few additional checks and balances to ensure that a retainer is being allocated properly. So the Carters want us to move our $2,000 deposit to pay off invoice 10,003, for example. So if we select or tag that invoice, our received amount still maintains at $2,000. Our to apply goes up to $1155.28, but we still have an available amount of that $2,000 retainer of $844.72. So now the carders want us to move that $844.72 down to an existing proposal. Well, we can do that too. None of our proposals are being listed on our client deposit retainer proposal grid, so let's click the Show All option, and there they are. They weren't initially showing because our received to date matches our requested amount, so by default they're not going to appear on the grid. But we want to move that additional $844.72 down to Proposal 3. So we can use our Edit button and put the $844.72. Notice, conveniently, Design Manager already has a transaction description of Apply Retainer for me. I can click OK. My Apply Retainer amount goes to $844.72. I tag, and now received is still at $2,000. To apply is now $2,000 as well, making the available go down to 0. So we're taking that $2,000 as a retainer, moving it or redistributing it to pay off an existing invoice and to increase the deposit amount on one of our existing proposals. If we click OK, let's see what happened. First, we have a brand new retainer of minus $2,000 with a transaction description of Apply Retainer. Notice my retainer information node is now gone. If we look at the other projects, Carter 01 for instance, if the retainer balance goes to 0, the information node goes away, as in the case of our Brigantine Beach home. Proposal 3 now has an additional deposit being displayed. There's our $844.72 that came from where? The application of the retainer. Invoice 10,003? Well, it's no longer in our open invoices, but rather it's in our paid close invoices folder, paid in full, and the payment came from the application of that retainer. And if we look at our project window for our status, we can see our available retainer is also down to 0, and we can see the total available is only from our previous outstanding deposits. So full integration throughout the software, and you can use a lot of different tools to monitor how different deposits and retainers are being reallocated, applied, and progressing through the design process. That brings us to a pretty good pausing point as we're going to move off of retainers over to deposits. Liz, do we have any unanswered questions I could ask?
Brad, we've answered all our questions up to this point, so I think you're good to move forward.
Fantastic. Okay. Deposits. Now, deposits are also funds received from clients indicating that the provision of goods and services has been agreed upon, and the deposit will be used to begin the purchase of such goods. Unlike retainers, however, deposits are tied intricately to the items on the proposal to which the deposit is recorded. How do we add deposits? Well, let's take a look at our professional platform for our example. All funds coming in to Design Manager in Professional go through AR, cash receipts, and we have our new tab for new entries and our existing tab for all of our previously entered cash receipts. Go down to our Add button. And let's say that we're getting a deposit from the Hilsons for the outdoor living area. And let's say they gave us exactly $2,340. Today's date is just fine for us. Let's say they paid not by check but by Visa. And that brings me to a good point. Design Manager is also partnered with Merchant Warehouse, which is one of the largest credit card processing companies in the country. Now, if I've subscribed to the Merchant Warehouse service as well, when I go ahead and put in my Visa payment type here, not only am I going to be indicating to Design Manager that the Hilsons have given us the $2,340 on their Visa, but Design Manager is actually going to go out to Merchant Warehouse's secure gateway and actually process that Visa transaction for me. So Merchant Warehouse can get the funds into my credit card account, my checking account or savings account as quickly as possible. So rather than having to individually run my Visa card or go into another web interface to put the card through, I can do it all through Design Manager with the Merchant Warehouse integration. That being said, let's go ahead. We'll put in Visa, the last 4 digits, which probably wouldn't be 4321, so we'll use those. And now we want to indicate to Design Manager, hey, out of this 2340, what are we paying for today? So we're going to be putting a deposit on our Proposal 1 for our outdoor living area. When we tag it, we can see our deposit retainer increased to 2340. We don't have any payments on invoice in this case, so our total receipt matches our amount, yielding a difference of 0, and we're ready to proceed. Click OK, and we have our deposit sitting on our new tab waiting for posting. Click the Post button. Yes, we drop off our new tab. We can see our deposit listed on the first entry on our existing tab. What else has happened throughout the software? Well, if we look at the proposal window for Hilson, we can see, one, that we have not only requested 2340, but indeed received that amount. Here is our check number, or in this case, the indication of the Visa in the last 4 digits that I entered, and today's date. Also, the status of my items in Professional automatically have updated from awaiting client approval to needs to order, indicating that I have indeed received and processed the deposit. The proposal status window is also updated. Again, this is a fantastic window to catch a snapshot of the items just upon a particular proposal, and we can see our requested deposit amounts and our received deposit amounts, check number, and as we go through the invoicing process further down the design cycle, we'll even see the application of the deposit as well. So a very handy way to monitor if items have received deposits, if so, what check number, what date, have they been applied on invoices, etc. And even back on our proposal window, proposal status, project status, pardon me, we can see here's our requested amount, there's our initial retainer, now we've received our 2340 for a total amount of deposits and retainers of 7340, which are then shown in greater detail on the deposit retainer tab as well. Another handy feature from this window is if I see an error in my deposit, I can use the Go To button, which jumps me right back to the cash receipt window with the appropriate transaction already highlighted, allowing me to make any edits or revisions as necessary. Lastly, if we look at one of the items on Proposal 1 through our specifications, we can see on our Item Status tab, not only has this item been included on Proposal 1, but this is the portion of that 2340 deposit that is just attributed to Item 5, and there's the check number and check date here as well. So again, full integration throughout the software of how those deposits are being allocated and intricately tied to the individual items themselves. Now let's take some examples or particular scenarios. Let's say a deposit has been received against a proposal and the client rejects an item at a later date. Well, provided that the item has not yet been invoiced, you can simply edit the proposal and remove the item or items, and Design Manager will automatically redistribute that entire deposit to the other items on the proposal. Let's see how that works. If we jump back to Design Manager, back to our Documents and Accounting, then we'll go down to our Carter's Brigantine Beach Home and Proposal 3. If we look at our status here, we can see there's two items on this proposal. We have the sconces and a French bronze, iron and bronze chandelier, and since they're both displayed in red, that means they are not yet invoiced to the client. But they have both received an applicable deposit. Let's say that the Carters didn't care for the sconces, so they want to order a different set of lighting, but in the meantime, they're going to have the $292.08 that we received for the sconces be applied to the chandelier. Okay, very simple. We can now keep our proposal highlighted and either use the edit button, or I can right-click and edit. Either way, I come to the Edit Proposal window, and I can see my two items highlighted. Here's our sconces, and here's our chandelier. To remove the sconces, we simply need to uncheck or untag the sconces and click OK. Now we're going to regenerate that proposal without the sconces. So here's our proposal. Notice we're keeping the same proposal number. The proposal is just a living, working document, and as we all know, things change, fabrics get canceled, items get canceled or back-ordered, so we can always update the proposal to reflect those changes. In this case, we only have reference number 15 for our chandelier, and we no longer have the sconces. I can accept my changes to the proposal, and we can see my total amount has dropped down, but my actual deposit received remains at that $2,080.72. And if we look at the status, we can see we only have the chandelier being displayed, and it now has the full $2,080.72. And when we go to invoice, it'll use all of that deposit simultaneously. There is the caveat, however, that I mentioned upon editing a proposal. When I edit, say I wanted to get rid of the sofa from this proposal. If I try to uncheck it or untag it, it's going to warn me or prevent me from doing so. It says that this item cannot be removed from the proposal since it's already been invoiced on the client, and it must be credited or the item will be removed. Why is this coming up? This is telling me that this is indicating that I've already used the deposit against the invoice for this item. So I can't take it off the proposal and try to reallocate or remove the deposit since it's been used down the road. I would then need to credit the invoice or some other way redistribute or reallocate or refund the deposit that I used against the sofa. So Design Manager has those checks and balances in there for you. Okay, moving a deposit. Well, just like retainers, we can manually move a deposit from a proposal to a retainer or another proposal or even to a payment on an invoice, and the procedure is the exact same as doing so for a retainer. Let's take a peek. Let's hop over to our professional platform, and let's imagine that for the Carters, for the Brigantine Beach Home, they might not decide to go with proposal number 3 and want to use that deposit that we received for some other means. Well, we can do so. Again, all of the manipulation in Design Manager for cash receipts coming in or being redistributed goes under our cash receipt window. Add again. We'll pop in the Carter's Brigantine Beach Home code, and here we go. Whenever we're redistributing funds, we're not adding new ones in, so our amount's going to be 0. Today's date is just fine. Again, I like to use the check payment type, so I can put in apply deposit. And here's our proposal 3. And notice we've not only requested, but received and have available $1,236. Now, as the Carters are not going to be proceeding with proposal 3, but they want us to maintain those funds to be used elsewhere, we're going to edit Proposal 3 and change the amount to a minus 1236, indicating that we're going to be removing that deposit. Reallocate deposit. Click OK. The proposal is automatically tagged for us, so we can see currently we have a negative deposit in our totals region. Now, the carders want to take a portion of that 1236 and they want to pay off invoice 10,003. So if we click invoice 10,003, which has a balance due of 1155.28, we can see that we're going to be adding a payment of that amount. But that leaves us with a remaining $80.72. So the carders want to take that remaining $80.72 and just add it to their existing retainer that's currently at $2,000. Well, we can do that too. Edit the retainer, put in $80.72, deposit on proposal 0003, and there we go. So now we have a positive retainer of $80.72, negative deposit of $12.36, which is a net effect of $1155.28 coming out of our deposit retainers, and that matches the payment on invoice 10,003 perfectly. So our receipt comes to 0, matching our amount, and our difference is 0 as well. Click OK, and our zero balance receipt here has 3 distributions in this case: the negative deposit, and then the positive retainer of $80.72, and the payment on invoice 10,003 of $1155.28. Again, net effect on our cash account is absolutely 0. So if you're reallocating retainers or deposits, make sure that that amount is 0, and you'll always keep your checkbook in balance. Click Post, send it off, and there it is. And once again, here's our 0 balance cash receipt with the 3 offsetting distributions listed in the receipts grid in the bottom. Let's see what happened with that. If we look at our proposal window for the Carter's Brigantine Beach Home, proposal 3, well, status items drop down to needs to order to await client approval because we've removed that deposit. As we can see, the deposit received is netting out to 0. But handily shown here, apply deposit in the check column shows me that, hey, I've actually taken an existing deposit and applied it elsewhere. And even on the proposal status window, we can see the items themselves now have a deposit received of 0. But again, I can see that my check number says apply deposit, using as a little status to myself to know that I've moved an existing deposit to another area for the Carter's use. If we look on our invoicing window, we can see that invoice 10,003 now has a payment of $1155.28 and a balance due of 0, effectively closing off that invoice. And we can even see all of that information on our project status. We can see our deposits. Here is the original deposit coming in, going out, the new retainer. We can see our total retainer amount, total deposit amount, and we can even see all of our invoices are closed unless we uncheck the show open only, and then we can see here's invoice 10,003 that is now paid in full. Again, there's my check number of applied deposit indicating that's where those funds came from. Okay. Another feature available when using deposits is the additional deposit request. Now, more and more frequently, we see designers asking for an initial deposit of, say, 50%, but then requiring or requesting a second, smaller deposit in order to keep the cash flow at an acceptable level. This can be accomplished in Design Manager with the additional deposit request. Let's hop over to Design Manager and we'll go through the steps of creating one. Back to our Documents and Accounting. Let's go down to the Carter's Pennington home, and let's imagine that the Carters are asking for some additional, or we're asking the Carters for some additional funds for our master bedroom and wine closet. We can see we've already received $9,917, but we want an additional amount to keep cash flow acceptable and to have some funds to pay our vendors. To make an additional deposit request, highlight the PO and edit, highlight the proposal and edit. That brings us to our Edit Proposal window, which, as we saw in the past, we can update or add or remove items. But in this case, we're going to go to the Remarks Options tab, and in the bottom left, we have a whole bunch of functions for additional deposit request. Now, I could manually enter an amount, or I could say I want an additional 25%. So I could use the Calculate button, and it's going to ask for an additional deposit percentage. This 50% defaults for my client deposit percentage in the Carter's project. We can change that to 25, click OK, and Design Manager automatically calculates the amount for me. However, as we can see, the $49.58 is 25% of the entire proposal amount. It's not the 25% of the proposal less any deposits already applied. If you'd want to have that figure, you can manually calculate it and enter it into the additional deposit amount. The required date defaults to today, and I like to use the Show Actual Deposit option so the Carters can see the original amount, the deposits they've sent so far, the estimated balance due on the proposal, and what I'm asking for today. And if we click OK, we can process an additional deposit request. And here it is. Notice the proposal title now says Proposal/Deposit Required. If we go to the last page, we can see the original proposal amount. Here's our original deposit on check number 3325 back in April. Total deposits so far, estimated due on the proposal, and here is our additional deposit request, 25% of that original proposal amount at $49.5850. If we close and accept, now on the information node of our proposal, we see our requested amount, and our additional deposit request is right here. Additional deposit of $49.58 requested on 10/9, and the amount we've received so far. So again, very conveniently and informatively listed right on the Documents and Accounting window, we can see all of the deposit requests, additional deposits, etc. for the proposal itself. In the Professional platform, you can do the same thing. Go back to our proposals, go to the Carters, highlight Proposal 1 for our master bedroom and wine cellar, edit, and rather than having it on the Options tab, Professional has an additional tab for additional deposit request with the same exact information as well. So both platforms have that feature, and I find it very convenient to get those extra funds necessary to keep purchasing and keep the cash flow appropriate. Now, applying retainers and deposits. In the most natural cases, we wouldn't be moving retainers or deposits around to other existing invoices or other proposals, etc., but rather we just utilize them or apply them in Design Manager terminology on an invoice to the client. So let's hop back to Design Manager, go to our Documents and Accounting, and let's say it's time to create an invoice for the Hilsons. We want to invoice all of the items on Proposal 1. Go down to our Invoice folder, click the Client Invoice button, and here's our new invoice window. I like to keep my lists as tidy as possible, so I often use the proposal number filter, and I can select Proposal 1 to keep my tagging list on my new invoice window as easy and as informative as possible. Transaction description, invoice for Proposal 1. Then I'm going to select all the items with my tag function. Upon doing so, notice, here's my total invoice price, there's our calculated sales tax. Deposits automatically get applied. So that deposit from Proposal 1 gets used as each item is tagged. I don't need to manually allocate it or remember to use those funds against certain items. Once the deposit is applied on the proposal, Design Manager does all of the memorization and hard work for me. Retainers, however, I can manipulate manually. It is the only field down here that I can type in. Now, if I wanted to attempt to use, let's say, $10,000, Design Manager is going to say, no thank you. It's going to warn me that the total amount deposit plus retainer is more than what is available. In other words, I'm trying to use more money than the Hilsons have actually given me. And it recommends to use the deposit analysis report to examine the deposit available, which we'll do shortly. So I need to change my retainer amount to something more appropriate. And as you can see, I still have $5,000 available, so I could apply a full $26,2080 to make this balance due a 0 on the invoice. And we can see, here's my application of the retainer, reducing the balance due on this invoice down to 0. So I'm just using the funds that the clients have already given me to invoice them out, but yet have a balance due upon the invoice of 0. Click OK. Print out our invoice. It's important to remember, even though this invoice has a balance due of 0, the process of creating the invoice is of utmost importance. Even if the client, the Hilsons, have given me 100% of the funds as deposits up front for all of the goods and services, I still need to make those invoices. Why? Well, in accrual accounting, that is when I actually accrue my revenue. It's when I attribute my cost of goods sold. It's when my sales tax becomes due or liable. It's also when I clear or alleviate all of those deposits that I have accumulated so far. All of that happens simultaneously upon the creation of the invoice, and it's really the engine that drives your income statement and balance sheet as well. So if you do get all of your funds up front, you still need to make invoices for those goods and services, even if the balance due, as in our case, is 0. And notice the less deposit, Design Manager has blended together that retainer application and the original deposit into a single easy-to-read figure. Close and accept the invoice. And now we can see, well, my invoice isn't even in my open folder as it's already closed and paid in full. I can see that my retainer information node has my original amount, how much I've used on the invoice, which I just did, and how much is available. If we look at the proposal for all of those items, status, we can see, 1, they're all listed in black, indicating that they are indeed invoiced in full, and the deposit received amounts are actually less than deposit applied amounts. That's because I used that retainer. I used both the deposit I originally received and a portion of our retainer, so I have a higher deposit applied amount than what I actually requested and or received. And if we look back at our project status, we can see the available retainer has dropped down by the amount that we used on the invoice. Our available deposit is 0 because we've taken all of the funds that we originally received on deposit on Proposal 1 as a deposit, and we have an available of $23.79.29, which matches our information node precisely. Again, all of the information is entirely throughout the software, consistent and accurate, and you can see it from all these different areas throughout the software. Now, we've discussed a lot of the overall retainer and deposit functionality, and we've looked at a few of the different ways to monitor the status of the deposit and retainers through some of the tools in Design Manager. Let's take a look at some of those briefly to recap. Let's hop back over to Professional. And a few of the windows that I kept going to were, first, the Proposal Status window. And I continually utilize this window as, one, it's in my experience that it's underutilized by many users of Design Manager, as they may not know of its existence, but it also narrows the focus of my analysis just to the items on a proposal. I may have a project of thousands of items, and if I'm trying to look through various reports or the specification search or specification window, the information is extreme. So the proposal status narrows it down to the items on a given proposal, and it gives me a lot of information in a quick snapshot. I can see which items are invoiced in black, which are not invoiced in full in red, and I have all of this fiscal information as well. How much I requested, deposit I received, invoicing information, balance due information, payments received, etc. Again, it's an extremely helpful window to just see the status of a given proposal. That goes hand in hand with the item window status tab. This breaks down the proposal, so now I can see which proposals my item has been on, how much I received, client check number, and the invoicing information as well. It's like a subset of the proposal status window in that I'm just looking at a particular item. Again, an underutilized tab that has a lot of information, so I don't need to go down and track down my accounts receivable coworker to see if a particular check has come in. I can simply edit the item and gain that information myself. And lastly, the project status window or tab in Design Manager. Again, a nice snapshot or an overview of all of the fiscal dealings with a particular project. Client deposit retainer information, invoicing information, even purchasing information, and then those are broken down into your deposit and retainer grids and invoicing grids, which would show deposit application as well. Again, another very good overview tool that's underutilized as it's often overlooked. But we also have a few reports in Design Manager that are designed just to monitor deposits. And one of them is one of the 5 main reports or 5 monthly reports that we often, time and time again, tell all of our clients to view. And those who don't know, that would be the aged accounts receivable, open client deposit, aged accounts payable, open vendor deposit, and the working process. And there are definitely tons of information, including a webinar or two about those 5 reports on our Help Center, so feel free to take a look at that. But the one of the 5 that we're looking for is the open client deposit. This report lists all the deposits and retainers we've received, the application of those on invoices, yielding us a nice linear accounting of how a particular client is going through and utilizing their deposits and retainers. And here we go. So we can see for the carders, for example, we have retainers coming in, deposits coming in, deposit deposit application, is it being used on an invoice, reducing that amount, another deposit, retainer being used, deposit coming in. So we have a nice linear progression of all the transactions for a particular client. Once this value gets down to 0, all of the entries will drop off of the report. More importantly, I recommend to review this report at least once a month to ensure that I'm invoicing my client properly. As we talked about when making an invoice, it's imperative to invoice a client for the goods and services, even if they have given you a deposit up front that covered the entire amount. We need to make that invoice to get our revenue, get our cost of goods sold, accrue our income, get our sales tax, etc. It's the engine that drives the income statement in Design Manager. So if we see entries on our open client deposit report that are getting quite old, they need to be either recognized to see if those are goods that should have been invoiced at this point, or if we're actually indeed holding on to the client's funds and we need to reapply them for future use or apply to a different project, or in fact refund them as well. So client open deposit should be monitored at least once a month, along with those other 4 reports: aged accounts receivable, aged accounts payable, open vendor deposit, and work in process. Hand in hand with the open client deposit report is the deposit analysis report. This shows the exact same information, but breaks it down to an even greater degree, as it will show us on a per item basis of where deposits have been allocated and used. So the first section, we'd see retainers, and here's our initial retainer, and there is our retainer being applied, as we did today. Here's our deposits being received, deposits on proposal 1, 2, and 3, and here's the additional deposit we applied on proposal 3 from our retainer. And we can see them being used on invoices, and it'll even break it down into what's been used from a deposit and what's been used from a retainer with the balance. And this balance, this total deposit retainer available, will always match the same value on the open client deposit report for each project. What the deposit analysis does, the next step forward, is that it shows each item and the deposit we requested and received and their application. So items with an available deposit will be listed on the deposits by line item, so we can see, hey, I've received funds for these items. Why are they not invoiced in full, or what's holding them up? So these two reports go in conjunction with one another, and they really provide a valuable way to track down any discrepancies in deposits, and more importantly, or at least equally importantly, to ensure that you're invoicing your clients for monies that you've already received in order to keep all of your financials in working order. Now, the one thing we did not discuss today is refunding deposits and retainers in Design Manager. Well, we've determined that is worthy entirely of its own webinar discussion, and there is one available on our Help Center right now, and I'm sure we'll be doing that one again in the future. That is under our client refunds and returns, and it discusses all manners of giving a deposit or retainer back to a client, and it goes into much more detail than we would have today. That being said, today's discussion was an overall analysis of deposits and retainers in Design Manager, along with several examples of inputting, reallocating, and utilizing retainers and deposits. And then I tried to examine the tools and reports to monitor the status of these funds and give you an overall viewpoint on how to keep all of those funds in balance. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any, Liz. If not, I'll turn it back over to you to conclude.
Brad, we do actually have one question for you.
Shoot.
The question is, can you use the deposit request against invoices instead of proposals?
No. Once you have the invoicing stage, the invoice then becomes the document upon which you'll be receiving the funds in. Okay, so if you've already invoiced the client and they have sent a payment or have not paid that invoice in full, what you could do, I'll give an example. 2 examples, actually. Let's use Carter's Pennington Home. They have 2 outstanding invoices, invoice 10,001 and 10,002. Let's imagine that they have placed a payment of only $500 on invoice 2. Partial payment. Check number 1501. Notice both invoices are still open, yet the balance due on invoice 2 has gone down by our $500 payment. So, first, I've already invoiced the client, so I do not want to go back to the proposing stage whatsoever. But I might want to indicate to the Carters that, oh, listen, I thank you for the $500 payment, but there is still a balance due upon this invoice. And I can indicate that in a few different ways. First, I could reprint the invoice using the Show Payments option. What this does is it turns the invoice into almost its own statement, in that I'm going to see the original invoice balance right here, and then I'm going to show the payment that we just recorded for $500 and the current balance due of that invoice. So now I can easily print this off or email it or export it off over to the Carters, saying quite nicely that there's still a $565 balance due upon this particular invoice. Another way, hand in hand with that, is I might want to alert them that not only have they not paid invoice 10,002 in full, but they haven't yet remitted any payment on 10,001. In that case, I would go under Reports, Accounts Receivable, Statements. The statement is going to show us all invoices for each of our projects that have not yet been paid in full. So if we run a statement for our Carter project, we now have a classic accounting statement. Here is our invoice 10,001, total amount, application and deposit, invoice amount, and the current balance due. Same with invoice 10,002, but we have a payment associated with that invoice for our balance due of $565, all of which is totaled and even aged along the bottom. So the Carters can nicely see that, well, it's been quite some time since we've created invoice 10,001, and it would be much appreciated if we could get some funds in. So I could send this off to the Carters as well. And you can print your statements out for all of your projects with outstanding invoices on a biweekly or monthly basis as well. But to summate, if you've already got to the invoicing stage, you do not want to use the proposal as a payment request. Simply reprint the invoice showing any payments so far, or print them a statement. And that will indicate to the client that it is time to start remitting some payment on those outstanding invoices. Excellent, excellent question. Is there a follow-up or other questions along those lines, Liz?
Brad, I think we're good for now on that one. Thank you. And that was our last question, so I think we're going to conclude things here. But we do invite you to email support@designmanager.com with any other questions you have about the software. Thanks to Brad, and thanks to everyone who attended today. We hope that you enjoyed the webinar, and if you would like to join us for our next webinar, Timekeeping, please visit designmanager.com to register. Or if you'd like to see a recorded version of this webinar, or you missed one of our previous webinars, please visit our YouTube channel, Design Manager. Thank you, and we hope you have a great afternoon.